Whatever you think CEOs are doing around you, it's probably not that.
I know there's this trope, CEO founders, after a certain stage, leaning back a little bit, jetting off to Davos. And sure, these people exist. But then there's the being a plumber and being a maid and being a decision maker and then also a salesperson and all of these things at the same time.
The bigger the organization gets, the more the CEO is wielding lots of influence and power. It's actually the opposite. Today, Raul and I are talking about you and your CEO. I personally worked for two great CEOs, but I always thought, how difficult can their job be? Is it justified that they're walking away with so much cash? And don't they have an army of awesome people like myself who is doing the real work for them? While all of this is true, your CEO doesn't have it half as nice as you might think. Today, we will tell you why, what that actually means, and build a case for you to be nicer to your CEO. Enjoy. So Raul and I, we just spent, it feels like an entire week together, but it was really just a day.
Yeah.
What did we talk about for so long?
Tony and me are working on something very exciting. And we are planning on expanding this little thing here into a little bit more. And be sure to stay updated because we have something to announce quite soon. And of course, we had a lot of coffees too. And Tony had his little thing as well.
And if you can't tell that we're, taking this seriously, you should really dial up or join in on YouTube because then you can see Raul's perfect, super professional new setup here that he's using in the studio. But enough of that intro stuff. Let's dive in. What is it we're going to talk about today, Raul?
We basically have this topic that we thought is quite interesting for a while, but we never got the angle really right. We think we have something that is actually also interesting to us, which is how actually CEOs' minds work and how also / founders, what troubles they have and why ultimately you might want to consider being a little bit nicer to them, also to your own benefit.
And the reason is actually that, both Raul and I, we had our little experiences with different CEOs. I myself have now, been a CEO for a little bit of a time. And I think there's some realizations that whatever you think, the CEOs are doing around you, it's probably not that. So they probably deserve a little bit more slack. And today we basically wanted to peel the onion on this, kind of go a little bit deeper on what CEOs are, usually up to and how shitty their day actually looks like, and why ultimately you should just be nicer to them. So maybe let's jump in.
So I think number one, and this applies from whatever perspective you're in, even if you are a CRO or even a co-founder sometimes, the day of a CEO probably looks different than you think that it does. And the stuff that a CEO does, and again, we are using CEO and founder interchangeably here many times. First of all, probably much wider than you think, but also not necessarily the things that they choose to do. So where maybe you're a product person or maybe you're a tech person or a salesperson, and I hope that is what you want to do to some extent, at least 8 to 10 hours a day. The CEO doesn't really get to choose that much. They are quite a little bit of I would say of a victim to the circumstances, and they don't control their own fate as much as you think they do. I know there's this trope of CEO founders after a certain stage kind of like leaning back a little bit and jetting off to Davos and whatever. And sure, these people exist, probably not in the early stage startup sphere though. But then there's being a plumber and being a maid and being a decision maker and then also a salesperson and all of these things at the same time. And especially being a salesperson is one of the biggest qualities of being a CEO and a founder.
I'm not sure if it's called quality, but I would just say it's the job, actually. So when I took the plunge, becoming a CEO, I was vaguely aware that basically my life is now going to turn into me being a salesperson. And I've been parts of that before. I've been a CRO before, so I was used to selling, at least internally, sometimes to some let's just say enterprise customers and prospects. But as a CEO, this is really your full-time job all the time. And let me explain this a little bit more, because it's not only the selling to customers part that I'm referring to here, right? Kind of especially early stage, that's obviously the case. You sell a lot. I mean, I was basically at Growblocks, I was the SDR. We had a couple of other SDRs as well, but I was the SDR and I was probably booking the most meetings of all of them, right? Sure, you do the sales stuff. Cool, totally get that. But that's not even what I'm referring to. Another piece of selling is also as a CEO to investors. Everything is great all the time. You tell them like how wonderful everything is going to be and so forth. And what you're doing there is selling. You're trying to convince someone of something that you hope them to believe, right? And then the last thing I would say is actually also selling to either new talent or existing talent or your employees or something like this. And this is not in a nefarious way, but it's basically you have to put a spin almost on everything, right? And a competitor raises a big new round. The CEO needs to build some kind of a story of what that now means for the organization. A big partner is doing something that's trying to encroach on your product. The CEO needs to go out and spin this thing. I don't know, something else might come along. And the CEO needs to stand there and say, like, you know what, actually, yes, I'm really happy for that opportunity to talk about that problem here. We're going to solve it like X, Y, and Z, right? And in reality, maybe we're going to talk about this also later a little bit. In reality, I can tell you that deep down, they also think like, oh shit, like our biggest competitor raising a big round. There's nothing positive here, like zero positivity in that one. But let me stand in front of my team of like 10, 20, 100, 200 people and actually tell them, what part of this is actually, beneficial for us. So we should be celebrating that our competitors are raising massive rounds.
So this also links to kind of like some advice for a CEO or founder themselves. So some things I've seen work really well as well. With this particular kind of issue, so your team doesn't realize all the things that you're doing and your team doesn't realize that not all of them are actually quite glamorous. Transparency, as simple as it is not really a habit every CEO and founder has adopted yet, but they should. So being quite transparent, maybe not about every single detail. Hey, we're discussing letting people go with HR. Maybe take it slower on that one if you really have to. But something like, look, man, I'm spending like 20% of time right now just hustling people down for a fund money. I'm spending 30% of time in recruiting. We're dealing with kind of setting up a new accounting scheme right now, and that just takes all that time away. I find that plus maybe even an additional layer of information is quite helpful at getting your team, first of all, to understand where you're at and maybe be a little bit less judgmental about not everything being exactly where they want. Because from their perspective, they're like, well, this is so obvious. The tech stack is fucked. Like, how the fuck are we not dealing with this? What's the CEO doing? He's not even in the office, right? So getting the optics right here is quite important to you. And it's not just for your self-preservation, but it's also for the motivation of the team. A team who thinks that the CEO is just blatantly ignoring and jetting off to places here and there, the challenges in the company is probably going to be less motivated. And tell them that maybe you're traveling, yes, 3-4 days out of the week, but it's one to like this tiny city in the UK where you just went through for 4 hours. And then, yes, you were 12 hours in Paris, of which 8 were spent transiting and 4 in a meeting room. So I think that makes it a bit more relatable. And they will maybe also approach you talking about that a bit more.
I think one thing that is sometimes a little bit poorly understood is CEOs always have to deal with the worst problems of the organization. So basically what this means, something is going wrong and you as a CEO have to parachute in most of the time, right? And at a certain stage, you have your lieutenants below that actually able to fully own those problems. But that's when you're a little bit, bigger in the organization, but also sometimes that just isn't enough and the CEO kind of needs to kind of help out, right? And my point here is, at the end of the day, the CEO is actually only working on the worst problems that exist in the organization all the time. And whenever one is solved and you think like, oh, my marketing problem is solved now, the CEO really is just moving on to the next issue that they need to deal with, right? So, we're kind of coming back to this theme here, but be nicer to your CEO. Understand a little bit kind of the shitty world that they're dealing with. And that's what we're kind of trying to create here, help you have a little bit more of a 360 view also what's going on there.
This also links to the next part. So the reason that they're always dealing with the worst problems, and that's part of the source of those problems, is that CEOs and founders have much less control than you probably think they do. Especially control of, yes, what they do, but then also who they are actually supposed to talk to and how to talk to them as well. So you think that the founder is ultimately your boss, but they probably have more bosses than you do. And that includes all those business angels, and that includes all those customers who are only talking to the CEO. And that also includes, most of all, of course, the funds, probably VC money, if you have that. That comes with obviously benefits, right? So obviously the money and the money from the customers and from the funds, but it also comes with a lot of downsides. So the amount of time spent dealing with these VCs is typically much more than only the board meeting that happens once every quarter. And the amount of money spending with and coffees and lunches, meeting with all kinds of people for all kinds of different reasons, is probably much more than you think. And they have less control over their calendar than probably you do.
Yeah. I think another thing to consider as well, it always sounds super flashy when the CEO is working on a new funding round and a couple of people want to be part of that process to kind of learn how this works out. But the issue is, going out fundraising is only fun when you have a really great company behind you. Then it's fun, because you basically the way this works is you're selling something, right? And if you have something that is absolutely awesome to sell, fantastic. That's going to be a fun journey. You're going to call up a couple of funds. These guys are not going to send their SDR investors. They're going to send their actual partners to those events. You're going to, talk to a couple of people, and very quickly you're going to have some term sheets. But that is, that's the outlier. People think that this is how this works kind of scenario. Most of the time, CEOs don't have an above average company to sell, so to speak. So they need to deal with the cards that they were dealt. And then going out, and I've done this myself once or twice, and then going out trying to sell that and trying to find a partner that believes in the story and then wants to invest based on that. You know what? It's not that much fun. It's really the same story as selling a product that isn't that great. A lot of people might just say like, you know what? Actually, I'm going to sit this one out, or call us back for the next round, or call us back when you have product market fit, or whatever it might be that they're kind of using as a delay tactic. That is really, really difficult. And I can tell you, this is also not fun to kind of do, right? So this coupled with, once you then do have a VC in the boardroom, you lose control over key parts of the organization or the business. And that is totally fair. That's kind of the bargain you strike. And it simply has to do with the new investor coming in just wants to make sure that the money is being used in the right ways, which makes total sense. But it also comes then with some strings attached, right? And maybe you're going to talk about this a little bit more, but ultimately the free range of the CEO that you think he or she has is actually not that free. It's actually fairly narrow, and they just kind of have to plow through that narrow path. So let's just say you are 100, 200 people, maybe you're 10, 20 million or something like this, and really think about what can the CEO, him or herself, actually just decide by themselves. Just think about that for a minute, right? Doing some specific moves in the budget. Need to ask the CFO. Like, is this okay with them? Is it not? Wants to change something in marketing, can't do that by himself. Wants to do something in sales or engineering, the product. All of these things need to go through multiple layers of people agreeing with that, right? And actually, the bigger the organization gets, and seemingly, the more the CEO is wielding kind of lots of influence and power, it's actually the opposite. It's actually less and less and less influence that the CEO really actually has of not just the day-to-day, but even some of the more strategic moves. And one of that has to do with folks like you listening to this show here right now. It's like, well, you're not reporting to the CEO or the CRO because you don't know what you're doing. You know very well what you're doing. And then the CEO needs to respect that. And if he or she doesn't, then to a degree, they're either saying that, you don't have a clue and therefore someone needs to step in, or you're kind of not that super important here and they know better, right? Both of those messages are pretty shitty to send, right? So, and if you have to do that as a CEO, it's really a kind of cutting the knees beneath up beneath people, because that's actually what it is, right? Kind of you going forward, you will be less capable and empowered to do your own decisions because the CEO basically kind of chose to take the steering wheel him or herself, and the CEO you just can't do that because you know the long-term implications of that. So what are you going to end up doing? You're going to end up not doing that and having therefore less influence in the organization, right? And kind of that conundrum, really those two things kind of play together quite a lot, actually. And that frankly also doesn't only happen to CEOs, it also happens to C-levels and VPs that have multiple people below them where you just can't go in and just, grab the wheel and do something that you think is right. It always includes a couple of other people. Let's move on to, I think, the most misunderstood piece. And so this is about money. Everyone thinks the big CEO is making tons of cash. And the answer is that's just not true. And sure, this is not true in the early stages of building an organization. I think we call it ramen profitability. Basically, the CEO doesn't pay themselves anything, or at least very, very little compared to market value, just to kind of not create big cost center around this. But salary aside, and as you grow the organization, you will be able to be one of the, let's say, top earners in the organization, aside from successful sales reps. It's always a good sign that salespeople earn more than the CEO in any organization, by the way. But the other thing that people are thinking about when they're saying, oh, the CEO is rich to a degree, has to do with the value of the organization and the money they might make from potentially selling that, right? And let me just give you a couple of examples here. So number one, there have been now a couple of situations where folks sold an organization for, I think, a lot of money, hundreds of millions sometimes, and the founding team walked away with absolutely nothing. How can that even be? How can you, and this was especially, I think they're called DraftKings or something like that, or maybe I'm mixing that up, but someone in that industry, I think they sold the company for $495 million, and they didn't get a dime. So why is that? The reason is, and this is, let's call it the fine print of those VC deals. It's liquidation preference or participating liquidation preference. There are a couple of those terms in there that CEOs and founders are looking out for a lot, but still might get kicked in the butt because of it. And that basically means that the VC doesn't only get in all the money that they put in. And like to say there's a $500 million exit and the VC put in $250 million or something like that. So it was quite a lot of money that VCs put in. What you basically have in those liquidation preferences is that money goes out first, and then the rest of the pot is being split. You have like different versions of that, even where 2 times the amount of the money that was put in by the VC is being taken out before anyone else benefits. And that very, very often leads to you seeing people exiting for maybe 50 million, 100 million, 250, whatever million. You actually, in many times, need to subtract not only, the sum of VC money that went into it, sometimes even a little bit more. And then that difference, what is still left there, then gets divided up to the other shareholders. And that sometimes is actually not that much. And let's just be honest here. If you are a CEO founder, chances are you might get very well compensated in the open market. Like, let's just say you're not the YC Combinator out of college person, but let's just say you have 10 years of experience, you've been successful, you have been doing a bunch of really cool things, and now you're doing a startup because that's really what you believe in. If you, after 7 or 10 years, get an exit for 50 million, and out of those 50 million, you get 5 or 2 or whatever number you think they're actually getting in the end, comparing that to the earnings they could have just done by being employed and having had an actual salary versus the ramen profitability salary, those two things sometimes balance out. And obviously being employed is, from a risk perspective, way more predictable than the other thing, right? And especially when people think like, oh wow, these guys exited for 50 million, 100 million. This is an awesome, almost unicorn founder. Well, the reality is they probably didn't actually make that much cash, afterwards anyway, right? So whenever you're thinking, hey, these CEO guys and ladies, they're just making so much cash, I can tell you that's probably not the case.
To make this really graspable, you can really imagine the curve of the earnings of a CEO, even in the case of a successful exit. And very often in the beginning of the lifetime of that company, there's maybe almost nothing or very little coming in. And especially when that founder is maybe not 22 or 23 anymore, they might have some costs. They might have to rely on the spouse actually to pay the bills at that moment for a couple of years. And I've even had it where a bunch of founders that I went to lunch with, I had to foot the bill, and they just asked me like, hey, can you pay that? I'll just repay you later or whatever. And that happens, and it's not that they're sad about that, and they're probably going to get rewarded later on. Not always, but the lifetime kind of cash flow curve is maybe not necessarily what you believe it is.
And then I also want to say, I've been part of 2 exits reporting directly to the CEO in both cases. I have a rough idea what both of them took away. And my first time around, I was like, oh, come on, why is he getting so much cash? And, all of us, we built the whole company. And, how is this even fair? I can tell you now that, when a CEO actually or founder gets to that point, after all of those situations where everything could have died and they actually land a great exit and they are able to make some cash from that, you know what? They more than deserve that. They absolutely more than deserve that. And there shouldn't be any envy or jealousy, anything like this around that. So few people get to that point. And you need to make a lot of correct decisions. And when you then finally do, I think the only thing left in the organization, for those folks should be, respecting and applauding them to a very large degree, right? So again, right, even when there's a big accident, even when the CEO is making some money, I think people need to realize how much of an outlier this actually is when this finally happens.
To add one more thing for clarity, because I'm not sure everyone also knows this. And when they do get that money, the question is when and in what form. So not every exit always consists of, hey, Tony, basically your stake is 20 million. You're going to get 20 million tomorrow. Maybe that happens if that's part of the agreement, but a lot of times also that is linked to an earnout scheme. So what is an earnout? It's a scheme where depending on how that company is being acquired, it might be cash. Very often it might also be a mix of cash and equity in the acquisition company. The founder still then has to stay with that company for a while to actually earn the full stake that they're entitled to. So I've seen all kinds of mixes, but it is very typical to have something like an earnout where the deal is, yes, Tony, we're going to pay you 20 million, 10 of which are in shares of our company and 10 of which are cash, but you're going to get them stocked up after another 2 or 3 years until we make sure the company's up and running, and then you can leave.
One other thing, and now then capping it here, and it's a little bit seen as a bad sign in Europe. I think in the US it's a little bit different, but a lot of founders and early employees actually can cash in with something that's called secondaries. So this sometimes happens. You have a very big, think about a Series B, Series C, like later stage round. Maybe some organization is hitting the $500 million or even unicorn status. And what then actually happens is that in this funding round, the investors are offering the founder and or early employees to sell their shares to them for that valuation or a little bit less. So what that actually means is when someone says, hey, we closed $100 million investment round with this new investor, it actually doesn't necessarily mean that $100 million went onto the bank account of the company. It might actually mean that, depending on the split, 60 million went to the company and 40 million was actually spent on buying shares directly from those employees. So this is actually really cool for employees and founders to get some liquidity before the eventual exit and IPO and so forth, because it is super risky, right? So what if it doesn't work out? And it's not like they're selling all their shares, but to get to take some chips off the table early on, it's certainly a good thing. But this is I think one of the now more emerging, more flexible ways how you can, try and make this work out for you as a founder, but also as an early employee.
Going into the second to last point, the kind of problems that CEOs and founders deal with. And from your point of view, wherever you are in the organization, typically your problems, especially the more junior you are more, and I'm not going to say your work is simple. That's not what I'm talking about. But the problems you're faced with are typically more black and white. So when you're a salesperson, you are obviously going to stand up in the morning, and your job at that day is to make the most sales possible. And that there's kind of a rather straight line to what that looks like. When you're a tech person, I'm not one, but I imagine that it's quite clear where we are in the process of developing this piece or that piece. It's quite clear the meetings I have and what I need to do to get there. That's not the life of a founder. So for founders, very much deal almost exclusively with very gray area problems that are very rarely clearly black or white situation. So from personal decisions about the company to strategic decisions to very explicitly, for example, hey, like, do we have to, we're in a pickle right now. Do we have to let people go? Do we hire more actually to kind of try to get out of the situation, which are completely opposite strategies there? Do we need to find a bridge, or are we trying to squeeze out the last kind of money that we have in this company right now to then get to a point where we can maybe raise a round because we're doing better again? Do we go to the US or not, which is going to cost 20-30% of the next round we're going to raise? Can we succeed in that? What happens if we don't? These are all very, very difficult problems to answer, with almost always not just a very a clear yes or no. And sure, they don't answer all these questions themselves. That is part of what a board is for. But at the end of the day, the CEO bears the responsibility of those things. And I can guarantee you that that's what they're losing sleep over, and that's what they're thinking about in the shower. And they're going to do that for weeks and months on end sometimes, ruminating about the same questions.
Yeah, and I would even exclude the board from that. I mean, maybe in a governance structure, the board is supposed to own some of those decisions, and they're kind of signing off on that stuff. But, it's rare that the board is kind of doing any of that stuff and carrying those decisions. So it's really the CEO and a couple of other folks, maybe the co-founders and so forth. And the thing with those decisions is you can never know if you're going to be right or wrong with these things. You simply cannot. And if you're right with it, then it's sometimes almost like, oh yeah, that was expected. That was clear. Like, that's one of the things I saw the most of the time, is when something worked out and then people looked back, it's like, yeah, that was the obvious decision to make. I mean, no problem at all. Anyone would have decided that direction, which is actually not true when the decision had to be made. And then the opposite is also true when you did make the wrong decision. Everyone is pointing the finger and it's like, oh, this was silly. Like, why would he do something like that, right? And one of the things, and not crying about it, but one of the things kind of I learned is, and I read a really cool quote on this, but like when you make the right decisions, when you're correct about something, a lot of people in the organization will hold up their hand and be like, I was part of this decision making, and I steered it in that direction, and because of me, we're going, we made the right call. The funny thing is, the exact same, process, same amount of people. Do you know what? If this turned out to be the wrong decision, the only person that's gonna, have to hold up his or her hand is the CEO. It's like, yeah, that was kind of my fault. And everyone around the table that was also part of it is gonna be like, yeah, no, I think he carried that one. and that's a thing, right? Especially in the negative side. I think it's really easy. It's really easy to dump on the CEO, dump on the one that actually made the decision. And I think that's true not only for the CEO, I think that's true for anyone making a call. Whenever there's turns out to be a wrong call, very few people have the courage and the spine to hold up their hand and say, actually, I was part of that decision. I also effed up. It wasn't only this other person.
Really consider that when maybe you don't get your will the next time for something as simple as some kind of budget that you're looking for. So the age-old question of how do we spend this limited amount of money for the million different things that we could be doing is, for example, one that they have to deal with almost every single day. And sure, they also have the CFO for that. But at the end of the day, when it comes to really strategically thinking about this company, then at the end of the day, it's the CEO talking about that.
I also think so. I mean, not so many folks out there are a successful repeat founder, right? Most of the successful founders I've met, they're like, okay, done now. I made some cash. I'm gonna do something completely different now because I'm not gonna go into this meat grinder here again. And that what does that mean? It means that most of the CEOs, most of the founding teams in those chairs building those organizations, they're kind of doing all of these things for the first time. And doing them for the first time has just a very large chance of being wrong about it, right? And ultimately they're going to go out and try and hire people that, been there, done that, and in the sales role, in the marketing role, in the finance role. But ultimately, making those hiring decisions and also making those calls really, really difficult to do if you have no clue whatsoever about these things, right? And learning by doing is great, but it's really difficult still for us to try and think through all of those different dimensions. And one thing that I kind of noticed, with myself, both as CEO and CRO, was a little bit, there's a bunch of people out there want to give you advice and you can go into all of those different directions. Number one, most of them actually don't have a clue what they're talking about. And number two, it becomes really difficult for you to figure out whom should you actually listen to, because there might be 20 people with, just as many opinions of what you should be doing. And how should you figure out who's the right person around this, right? And even that is a skill that you can get easily wrong, listening to the wrong folks here, right? So again, cut your CEOs some slack when they mess up.
And the last point here, so it's not just that it's the first time that they're founding something. It's very likely also the first time that thing that company is doing is either the first or among the first times to be done that. So yeah, sure, you're having a vertical marketplace for tulip gardeners or a SaaS tool for sit-at-home, wood-made bike creators. That's probably the first time someone's done that. All of those advisors, all those things coming in, those sources, at the end of the day, nobody really knows how to do that. It's not like there's a playbook. There's no instructions. There's no YouTube video you can watch. All there is your intuition and kind of your idea of where this vision should be going as a CEO.
And luck. And
yes.
Luck. There's a lot of luck in this thing, by the way. And that's the only way I can, justify myself not jumping off a roof or a cliff or something. It's like, you know what? Some other people are just a little bit more lucky than maybe I was or something, Anyway, do we have one more point here?
Last one. Might be tiny, but when it comes to the inner life of a CEO, and obviously everyone is different, but the people that I've spoken to and that I've really gotten to know also over years, so not just like one meeting, that's not where you get these things from. Very often they have to also live parallel lives when it comes to their kind of mental health and when it comes to their emotions. So they might lose sleep over a billion things, and that carries over to the next day in the shower, and they go to work very worried that they're going to be able to raise the next round, or that maybe the key client is dropping off, and what that means strategically for the company. But then when it comes to the all hands, they have to be on point, and they have to sell, as you said in the introduction, the nice parts about what's happening and praise people and make it so that everyone is hyped. I'm not saying that has to be the case, but that's how CEOs often are, and what also a company needs. So it's probably not a good idea to come in there all gloomy and we're all doomed, we're all screwed. Guys, I don't even know what the point of this is, because if that happens, you're probably all going to run away from that team. And so this duality of kind of having to be between all these different states and sometimes even put many masks on, also to the investors, takes quite a toll on people's mental health, to be honest.
So, and there was, I kid you not, there was a bit of research done into, I think, Fortune 500 CEOs. And I think they found that more than 30%, like 30-odd%, actually have very clear signs of being a sociopath. And the reason is, I believe, a little bit that, because it is really taxing on, on your mental health. I don't want to go into this millennial, Gen X, Y, whatever, talk track, but it is taxing on your mental health when you need to run in two different realities all the time. As you just mentioned, right? You're fretting over this one thing, you can't figure it out, and you have this chain in your head of like, hey, all of these 5 things that are currently not going right at all need to go right for me then to go out and do fundraising and then do this other thing. And as you not only talk to investors, you need to tell them, obviously, this is all gonna, it's perfect, but also to your team, who are also smart people, who are also like looking, and it's like, these 5 things are not going well, and we kind of need probably all of them to go right in order to get to this next step. And bringing all of that together, and to a degree leaning into, it's like, yeah, no, I see the same things, but I think we can figure this out like this and like that. I think it fucks with people. I think so. And I can just tell from my own experience. So we know when we shut down Growblocks, I was kind of feeling actually pretty good. It was after the summer, everything was great. And then we did the last couple of comms pieces to, the team basically learned first, then the investors, I think the board learned first, then the team, and then the wider investors and customers and so forth. So all of this was done. We were kind of, shutting things down. Everything was good. I was then sick for like 6 consecutive weeks. And I was like myself, like, wait a minute, Tony, you're never sick. Like I literally have this thing where I'm maximum sick once a year, like for a couple of days. And usually those sick days fall on like a long weekend of holidays or something like this. That's usually kind of how it comes out. And there was like sick for 6 consecutive weeks, right? And, as I was in there, I was like, a little bit of bad luck. Now looking back, I'm like, no, you're probably a little bit messed up here, Tony. And basically your body was like taking back some of the toll, right? And I think I'm probably not an outlier in these things, right? So you don't need to have any pity on me or with me. I'm not sure kind of how to say it. But again, be nicer to your CEO. He or she is probably going through some of the same meat grinder thoughts that I just kind of outlined, and just lift them up a little bit, be a little bit more nice to them, and maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a promotion in it for you too if you're starting to understand how the other side of this works, right? So I think that was even a little bit of a personal touch note here in this show here today, bro. Wow.
So let's end it here. Hang up the Spotify, Apple, whatever you're listening this to. Not before giving a subscribe and like button, by the way, and sharing this with your friends. Go out, hug your CEO, invite them for a coffee or a lunch, and just ask them how their day is and see what happens.
Yeah. Just be nice to them,
yeah.
Okay? Have a good one, everyone. Cheers.
Bye-bye.